My company laid me off via a cold email after 10 years of service. They forgot to remove me from the company-wide mailing list, and now I have a front row seat as their incompetence burns the entire company to the ground. For 10 years, Innovatech wasn't just my job. It was my life. I started there as a junior project manager, back when we were a scrappy startup in a cramped office that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee. I was there for the all-nighters, the product launches, the Christmas parties. I saw colleagues get married, have kids, buy houses. They weren't just co-workers. They were my second family. I poured a decade of my life into that company, into building something I was truly proud of. And then, we were acquired. The new parent company installed their own CEO, a man named Rex Thompson. He was one of those corporate hatchet men, a guy with a plastic smile and eyes as empty as a shark's. He walked through the office like he owned the place, which I guess he now did, speaking exclusively in a language of pure, meaningless business jargon. Everything was about synergizing our verticals and optimizing our deliverables. He was a human buzzword, a walking, talking LinkedIn post, and we all knew he was here to do one thing: cut costs. The end came on a Tuesday morning. We all got a mandatory calendar invite for a 15-minute all-hands Zoom call. No description, no agenda. When I logged on, my screen was just a grid of 100 nervous, confused faces. Then Rex Thompson's face appeared. He wasn't even live. It was a pre-recorded video. He smiled his plastic smile and announced that, as part of a strategic restructuring, the company was optimizing its human capital. He said our roles were being eliminated, effective immediately. He thanked us for our service, told us HR would be in touch with severance details, and then the video ended. The entire call, the entire erasure of a decade of my life took less than 5 minutes. And then, one by one, my systems went dark. My Slack account deactivated. My company email, access denied. My work laptop, which was sitting on my desk, suddenly went black, and then the screen lit up with the Innovatech logo as it was remotely wiped. Just like that, 10 years of work, of relationships, of my life, gone. I was just sitting there in my home office, staring at a blank screen, a ghost in a machine I had helped to build. I was unemployed, shocked, and utterly betrayed. But as it turns out, the human robot who had wiped my digital life clean had made one tiny, critical mistake. The next few days were a depressing blur of updating my resume and scrolling endlessly through job postings on LinkedIn. My life had shrunk to the 4 walls of my home office. On Friday morning, I was sitting at my desk, sipping my 3rd cup of coffee, when my personal email inbox pinged. It was just another notification in a sea of them, but this one was different. The subject line read, "Mandatory all hands post-restructuring town hall agenda." I froze. My heart gave a little jolt in my chest. The email was from Rex Thompson's executive assistant, but it shouldn't have come to me, not to my personal email. I clicked it open, my hands suddenly clammy. It was a standard corporate email outlining the agenda for a meeting to realign our strategic vision moving forward. But as my eyes scanned the recipient list, I saw it. Tucked in between hundreds of individual employee emails was a single entry, all staff. And in that moment, I understood. The IT department, in their robotic, checklist-driven efficiency, had deactivated my individual work email, my Slack account, my access to the company servers. They had wiped my digital existence clean, but they had forgotten one tiny, crucial detail. They had forgotten to remove me from the company-wide distribution list. I was a ghost in the machine, a digital phantom haunting the servers of a company that thought I was gone. A part of me, the responsible, professional part, knew I should report it immediately. I should send a polite email to HR, inform them of their oversight, and have myself removed. But another part of me, a darker, more curious part, a part that was still raw with the sting of a decade's worth of loyalty being erased in a 5-minute video. That part of me had a different idea. What could it hurt to just watch for a little while? To be a fly on the wall as the company I had helped build began its new chapter without me. So I did nothing. I just sat back, took another sip of my coffee, and waited. I had no idea I was about to get a front row seat to the most spectacular corporate implosion in tech history. And it all started with a single doomed project. A project I had warned them about. A project they called Chimera. My ghostly voyeurism didn't stay passive for long. A few days after the town hall, an email landed in my inbox that made my blood run cold. It was from the new head of engineering, a crony Rex had brought in from his last corporate raid. The subject line was aggressive. Action required. Project Chimera timeline acceleration. Project Chimera. My stomach twisted into a knot. It was our company's next big thing, a hugely ambitious software suite that was supposed to revolutionize the industry. It was also a complete and utter mess. I had been the lead project manager on it for a year before the acquisition. I knew its guts, its architecture. And I knew it was riddled with deep, fundamental flaws. I had spent months warning the old leadership that we needed to delay the launch, that the core code was unstable. And now this new guy, this corporate stooge, was announcing that they were accelerating the timeline. I read the email, a sense of morbid fascination washing over me. They were pushing the launch date up by 3 months, just in time for the big annual tech conference. It was pure marketing, a decision made by men in suits who had never written a line of code in their lives. The next email in the chain confirmed my fears. It was from a group of senior developers, my old team. Their tone was frantic, panicked. They were talking about being forced to skip entire phases of quality assurance testing, to just patch over critical bugs instead of fixing them, all to meet this new, impossible deadline. And then I saw a familiar name, Sarah. She was one of the best developers we had, a brilliant, no-nonsense engineer who I had worked with for years. Her reply to the chain was a masterpiece of corporate courage. It was polite, professional, but the desperation was clear between the lines. With all due respect, she wrote, pushing forward with this launch schedule without adequate time for QA and debugging introduces a significant and unacceptable level of user-facing risk. We are talking about potential data corruption and critical system failures. She was waving a giant red flag. She was trying to save them from themselves. The reply from the new VP of Product, another one of Rex's cronies, came less than 5 minutes later. It was sent to the entire engineering department. Sarah, it began, the single name a clear power move. Thank you for your input. Moving forward, this team will be focused on proactive solutions, not prohibitive roadblocks. Let's maintain a positive and can-do attitude. It was a public execution. He had taken her valid, critical warning and dismissed it as negativity. He had told one of his best engineers to shut up and smile. And as I read that email, I knew. This wasn't just a bump in the road. This was the beginning of the end. And as the launch date grew closer, the carefully constructed corporate facade began to crack, and the blame game began to play out in a glorious, company-wide email chain. With 2 weeks to go before the accelerated launch of Project Chimera, the first cracks in the facade began to show. It started with an email from the new vice president of marketing. It was one of those painfully cheerful, company-wide emails, complete with exclamation points and stock photos of smiling, diverse office workers. Team, it began, I'm thrilled to announce that the pre-launch feedback for Chimera has been overwhelmingly positive. Our beta testers are raving about the new features. I almost choked on my coffee. I knew for a fact this was a lie. I was still in a private group chat with some of my old developer friends, and they had been sending me screenshots of the beta tester forums. The feedback wasn't just negative. It was apocalyptic. Users were reporting catastrophic bugs, data loss, and a user interface so confusing it was practically unusable. I was still shaking my head at the sheer audacity of the lie when the first reply landed in my inbox. It was from the head of engineering, and he had hit reply all. His message was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate warfare. Glad to see marketing is so optimistic, he wrote. It would be even more optimistic if my team had the finalized spec list you promised us last week, so we could address some of the feedback. And with that one beautiful petty email, the floodgates opened. The vice president of sales replied next, also to the entire company. The spec list wouldn't be an issue if engineering could stick to a timeline for once. Then came the head of product. Maybe we could meet our timelines if sales would stop promising clients features that don't exist. It was a glorious, cascading disaster. A full-blown reply-all war with the entire C-suite, the company's highest paid and most powerful executives publicly tearing each other to shreds in front of their 300 employees. They were like rats in a trap, turning on each other as the walls closed in. The chaos lasted for a full, beautiful 27 minutes. And then, a final email landed, an email that brought the entire war to a sudden, screeching halt. It was from the big man himself, Rex Thompson. It was one sentence, no greeting, no sign-off. Just 4 ice-cold words. Take this offline. Now. The silence that followed was absolute. The digital battlefield went quiet. But I knew this was just a temporary ceasefire. The real war was just beginning, and the real casualties weren't the VPs. They were the grunts in the trenches. The developers and project managers who were being forced to march this doomed project towards its inevitable, spectacular failure. And one of them, my old mentee, was about to send me a desperate cry for help from the inside. The email war had been entertaining. A morbid kind of comedy. But the humor vanished a few days later when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't heard from in weeks. It was Kevin, a bright, ambitious kid I had mentored when he was just an intern. I'd helped him get his first full-time role as a junior project manager. The text was simple, and it sent a chill down my spine. "Hey man, got a minute?" "Need some advice," I called him immediately, his voice on the other end of the line. It was unrecognizable. The energetic, optimistic kid I knew was gone, replaced by a man who sounded hollowed out, exhausted to the bone. "Kevin, you okay?" I asked. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Yeah, man, just living the dream." He told me everything. He described a work environment that had become a pressure cooker of fear and toxicity. 80-hour work weeks had become the norm. The new managers, Rex's hand-picked lieutenants, were ruling by intimidation, openly threatening their teams in daily stand-up meetings. "They literally told us," Kevin said, his voice a low, terrified whisper, "meet the deadline, or your name will be on the next restructuring list. People are burning out. People are crying at their desks. It's a nightmare." And then he confirmed my darkest suspicions. "The worst part," he said, his voice cracking, "is that we're all being forced to lie. I have to sign off on weekly progress reports for Project Chimera that are pure fiction. We're reporting 90% bug-free, but we all know the system is barely functional. It's a total disaster, man, and everyone knows it. But nobody is willing to say anything because we're all too scared of getting fired." Hearing that, it changed everything. My quiet, detached observation, my feeling of grim satisfaction at watching the company implode. It all evaporated, replaced by a surge of protective anger and a genuine aching concern for the good people, my friends, who were still trapped inside that burning building. I gave Kevin the best advice I could. I told him to document everything, to save every email, to create a paper trail to protect himself. I told him to start looking for a new job immediately. When we hung up, I sat there in the quiet of my office, the schadenfreude I'd been feeling now curdled into a cold dread. This wasn't a comedy anymore. This was a tragedy waiting to happen. And I knew with a sick certainty that the launch of Project Chimera wasn't just going to be a failure. It was going to be a public execution. Launch day. I woke up not to an alarm, but to the frantic buzzing of my phone on the nightstand. I squinted at the screen, a half-dozen news alerts all saying some version of the same thing. TechCrunch, Innovatech's Chimera launch is a train wreck. Wired, how a Silicon Valley darling imploded on launch day. A grim, humorless smile touched my lips. I had known this was coming, but I hadn't expected it to be so immediate. I got out of bed, went to my office, and opened my laptop. My personal inbox was a war zone. It was a cascading, real-time chronicle of a company having a complete and total nervous breakdown. The subject lines told the whole story. First, an email from the head of IT, the subject line a frantic, all-caps declaration, urgent, server 1 is down. 5 minutes later, another one. Critical widespread user data corruption, all teams on deck. Then, a panicked email from the head of customer support. Customer support lines are completely overwhelmed. We are experiencing a total system failure. It was a symphony of incompetence, and I was in the front row. I leaned back in my chair, just soaking it in. This wasn't just a buggy launch. This was a 5-alarm fire, and the arsonists were the ones in charge. And then, the crown jewel of the morning landed in my inbox. It was an email from the king himself, Rex Thompson. But he had made a fatal, glorious mistake. Instead of sending it to his small circle of executive cronies in his panic, he had sent it to the all-staff distribution list. The subject line was just one word, now. The body of the email was a masterpiece of impotent blame-shifting rage. Someone, it read in all caps, get me a situation report I can actually read. I don't want excuses, I want answers. Who is responsible for this? I just stared at the email, a slow smile spreading across my face. The captain of the Titanic, in the middle of sinking the ship, was screaming at his crew, asking who had hit the iceberg. The sheer, breathtaking lack of self-awareness was a beautiful thing to behold. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and put on a fresh pot of coffee, a dark, strong roast. I knew with a deep and satisfying certainty that this was going to be a very, very long day. And I also knew that when the fires finally died down, the executives would need someone to blame. They would need a scapegoat. By late afternoon, the initial storm of panic emails had subsided, replaced by something far more sinister. I started receiving emails from the HR department, looped into a private chain between Rex, the new VPs, and the head of human resources. They were discussing the communication strategy for the failed launch. It wasn't a post-mortem to figure out what went wrong. It was a strategy session to figure out who they were going to blame. I watched in real time as they constructed their narrative. They decided, with a chilling, detached cruelty, to pin the blame for the entire disaster on the original project lead for Chimera, a brilliant, dedicated manager named Frank who had been laid off in the same wave that I had. They were going to cite his foundational architectural flaws as the root cause of the failure. He wasn't even there to defend himself. They were going to professionally execute a man who had already been discarded. But then it got worse. The VP of product, the same one who had publicly shut down my friend Sarah, chimed in. "We also need to address the internal negativity that contributed to the launch day instability," he wrote. "I recommend we terminate Sarah Jenkins, effective immediately, for her persistent lack of team-oriented proactivity. Her negative attitude was a clear roadblock to success." I felt a surge of pure, white-hot rage. Prohibitive roadblocks. He was using the same soulless jargon he'd used to dismiss her valid, critical warnings as the official reason to fire her. She had tried to save them. She had tried to stop this very disaster from happening. And her reward was a public crucifixion. 2 hours later, the official press release went out and was immediately forwarded to the entire company. It was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, a symphony of lies that blamed Frank's legacy code and a culture of negativity for the problems. It announced Sarah's termination and praised the decisive leadership of Rex Thompson. I watched as my friends, my good, hard-working, honest friends, were sacrificed on the altar of executive incompetence. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. My passive, morbid curiosity, my quiet satisfaction at watching the company burn, it all transformed into a cold, hard, and focused sense of purpose. I wasn't just a spectator anymore. I was a witness. And I had the evidence. That night, my desire to watch their downfall turned into a quiet, calculated plan to cause it. And it all started with a simple 58-page PDF I named the Innovatech Papers. I didn't sleep that weekend. I lived on black coffee and a cold, burning sense of purpose. My mission was simple: to take the chaotic storm of emails I had collected and forge them into an undeniable weapon. I opened a blank document, and at the top I typed a title that felt both audacious and entirely appropriate: The Innovatech Papers. I started with a timeline. I went back through my inbox, finding the earliest emails from a year ago where Frank, the original project lead, had first raised concerns about Chimera's unstable architecture. I copied and pasted his polite, professional warnings and the dismissive, jargon-filled replies from the old management. Then I moved on to the acquisition, to the arrival of Rex and his cronies. I meticulously documented every single step of their disastrous leadership. I highlighted the email from the new head of engineering, announcing the accelerated timeline. I included the entire frantic chain from the developers, their panic and desperation clear in every line. I made sure to bold Sarah's courageous warning about the unacceptable user-facing risks, and I placed the vice president's condescending, dismissive reply right below it, a perfect, damning contrast. Then came the reply all war. I copied the entire glorious 27-minute exchange, from the first passive-aggressive jab to the final, furious shutdown from Rex. It was a perfect, self-contained portrait of executive incompetence, a masterclass in hubris and blame-shifting. Finally, I added the last, most damning pieces of evidence. I included the HR email chain, the one where they calmly and coldly planned the execution of Frank and Sarah. I highlighted the exact phrases they used: foundational architectural flaws, lack of team-oriented proactivity, the soulless corporate language they had used to justify destroying 2 innocent careers. I worked for 48 hours straight, organizing, formatting, and annotating every single email, weaving them together into a single, undeniable narrative of greed, incompetence, and corruption. When I was finally done, the document was 58 pages long. 58 pages of their own words, their own failures, their own lies, all laid out in perfect, chronological order. I saved it as a PDF, a digital bomb, and I knew exactly who I was going to send it to. All that was left to do now was to light the fuse. That Sunday night, I took the final steps. I created a new anonymous email address using an encrypted service based in Switzerland. The username was just a random string of numbers and letters. I was a ghost, preparing to deliver a message from the other side. Then, I went to the website of a major tech publication and found the byline of a journalist named Alistair Finch. He was a legend, a bulldog reporter who had a reputation for breaking the biggest corporate scandals in Silicon Valley. He had taken down 2 CEOs in the last 5 years. At the bottom of his author page was a secure, encrypted contact form. I took a deep breath and I composed my message. I kept it simple, direct, and completely untraceable. There was no emotion, no long, rambling story, just 2 ice-cold sentences. To Mr. Finch, I wrote, "I am a former employee of Innovatech. I believe the enclosed document will be of interest to you." Then I clicked the Attach File button and selected the 58-page PDF I had so meticulously created, the Innovatech Papers.pdf. It uploaded in a matter of seconds. And then, I just stared at the screen. My cursor was hovering over the bright blue Send button. This was it. This was the point of no return. The moment I clicked this button, I would be setting off a chain reaction that I could not predict and could certainly not control. It was terrifying. But then I thought of Sarah, of Frank, of all the good people who had been sacrificed on the altar of Rex Thompson's ego. And I thought of the 10 years of my life I had poured into that company, only to be erased in a 5-minute video. My hand was steady. I clicked the button. A small notification popped up. "Your message has been sent." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't even check to see if it went through. I just closed my laptop, the back of my neck prickling with a mixture of terror and a profound, exhilarating sense of justice. All I had to do now was wait for the story to break, and for the world to learn the truth. It happened at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. The story didn't just break, it detonated. Alistair Finch's article went live with a headline so beautiful, so perfect. It was like poetry. The Innovatech Papers, how executive hubris burned a tech darling to the ground. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. He had used my dossier as the foundation, but he had built a cathedral on top of it, complete with anonymous, on-the-record quotes from current employees confirming everything. Within an hour, it was the #1 story on every tech site in the country. It was trending on Twitter. It was everywhere. I sat in my office, and for the first time in months, I wasn't looking at job postings. I was watching the Innovatech stock ticker on my phone, and it was beautiful. It was a sheer, vertical, blood-red line, plummeting in real time as the market reacted to the news. They weren't just losing face. They were losing hundreds of millions of dollars every single minute. And then I opened my personal email, and I witnessed the apocalypse. The article, my article, had been forwarded to the all-staff email list. And the company was having a full-blown public meltdown. It was the reply all war all over again, but 1,000 times more chaotic. Employees were openly panicking. Managers were turning on each other, desperately trying to distance themselves from the decisions that were now laid bare for the entire world to see. People were forwarding the article back and forth, adding their own commentary, their own stories of mismanagement and abuse. It was a digital revolution happening in real time in my inbox. And then, like a final pathetic gasp from a dying king, one last email from Rex Thompson appeared. It was addressed to the entire company. "All staff are reminded," it read, his tone now a desperate, pleading echo of his former authority, "that sharing confidential company information is a fireable offense and a direct violation of your non-disclosure agreement." The reply came less than a minute later, from a junior developer in the mobile division. He had hit reply all, and his message was just a single glorious, beautiful word, LOL. It was followed by a flood of others, a tidal wave of digital defiance from the employees who were no longer afraid. My inbox was a waterfall of mocking memes, of angry resignations, of people finally telling the truth. The king was dead, and the peasants were storming the castle, and I knew, as I watched the chaos unfold, that the real reckoning, the one that mattered, was about to come, not from the employees, but from the board of directors. The corporate-wide meltdown lasted for a full business day. And then, at 9 a.m. the following morning, an email landed in my inbox that was different from all the others. It wasn't from an employee or a panicked VP. It was from the board of directors of the parent company, and it was addressed to everyone. The email was a model of swift, brutal corporate damage control. The first paragraph announced in cold, unambiguous terms that Rex Thompson and his entire executive team had been terminated, effective immediately. There was no talk of spending more time with their families or pursuing other opportunities. Just terminated. Gone. The second paragraph announced that all work on Project Chimera was being halted indefinitely, pending a full independent third-party investigation into the product's development and launch. And the third paragraph was the one that made me feel a profound, quiet sense of justice that went deeper than any revenge. The board, on behalf of the parent company, issued a formal, public apology to the employees who had been wrongfully terminated in the wake of the failed launch. They named Frank and Sarah specifically, and they offered them both their jobs back, with full back pay and a sincere apology for the damage that had been done to their professional reputations. I sat back in my chair, reading the email over and over. It wasn't just a victory. It was a complete and total validation of every warning, every concern, every fear that the good people at that company had tried to voice, only to be silenced by the arrogance and incompetence of the men in charge. The system for once had worked. The truth had come out, and the people responsible were being held accountable. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. The fire of my anger had finally burned itself out, leaving behind not ash, but a clean, calm, and quiet sense of closure. I knew there was only one thing left to do. It was time to finally, officially, sever my last remaining tie to the company I had once loved. A month later, the dust had started to settle. Innovatech had a new CEO, a woman with a stellar reputation for turning companies around by actually listening to her employees. The stock had stabilized, and most importantly, I got a text from Sarah. She was back at her old desk, with a promotion and a raise, leading the team that was tasked with salvaging what was left of Project Chimera and rebuilding it the right way. I sat at my desk, looking at my own still active personal inbox. The flow of internal Innovatech emails had slowed to a trickle, mostly boring corporate announcements about the new holiday schedule and the updated dental plan. The chaos was over. The war was won. It was time for this ghost to finally leave the machine. I opened a new message and addressed it to the new head of HR. I kept it simple, polite, and to the point. "Hello," I wrote. "I believe there has been an oversight. I was part of the strategic restructuring on date, but it appears my personal email address was never removed from the all-staff distribution list. Could you please remove me at your earliest convenience? Thank you," I hit send. A few minutes later, an automated reply landed in my inbox. "Your email address has been removed from this distribution list." And just like that, it was over. I was finally officially gone. I closed my email, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel a sense of loss or anger or betrayal. I just felt a quiet sense of peace. I looked out my office window at the bright afternoon sun and I smiled. Because tomorrow morning I had a job interview, a second-round interview, at a small, innovative company that was getting rave reviews for its amazing work culture. A company that my friend Sarah had recommended me for just last week. It was a company known for treating its employees right. And I had a feeling I was going to like it there. And with that final quiet email, our narrator's journey comes to a close. It's an incredible story that starts with a feeling of complete powerlessness, of having a decade of loyalty erased with a single click. But it ends as one of the most satisfying tales of corporate karma you'll ever hear. It shows how a culture built on respect can be dismantled by arrogance, and how the greatest liability a company has isn't a faulty product, but the good people it chooses to discard. What's so fascinating when you really unpack it is that the company's fatal mistake wasn't the flawed software or the toxic management. It was their belief that the people they laid off simply ceased to exist. They turned our narrator into a ghost, but in doing so, they accidentally made him the one person who could see everything without being seen. It really makes you question the nature of power in the digital age. Is the real danger not what your employees will do when they're on the clock, but what they can see when you forget they're still watching? If you believe every story is a chance to unpack the complexities of human nature, make sure to subscribe and join the conversation. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories to unpack together. Until then, stay thoughtful.